Okay, so have you ever, wondered if maybe there's a bit more to like life and death and all that?
Hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what we're diving into today, this whole idea of spiritism.
Okay.
But like, before you go picturing like ghosts and stuff,
Right.
it's not really about that. Think of it more as like, a different way of looking at those, big questions we all ask.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're going to try to unpack this spiritism thing.
Yeah.
We'll look at the main ideas, where it came from, and yeah, even some of the criticisms.
Sure.
And to do this right, we're going straight to the source. What is Spiritism? By Allan Kardec.
Oh, okay.
This guy, Kardec, is basically like the father of this whole Spiritism movement.
Right. Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
What's that?
Kardec, he insisted on writing this book based on like his own research and logic. He even said he didn't use any like spiritual help while writing it.
Oh, wow. That's kind of intriguing, isn't it? I mean, you'd think.
Right. It's like he knew people would be skeptical, so he wanted to address that right from the start.
Yeah, exactly. Like he wanted to be clear that Spiritism wasn't about, just blindly believing things.
Yeah.
In fact, he says in his book, Spiritism has no need for miracles to prove its truth. He really stresses that idea of like reason and evidence.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just accepting things, at face value, he's saying we should be more, what, like critical and ask questions?
Precisely. And that's so key to understanding Spiritism. Kardec even says that it's inevitable that like different Spiritist groups would pop up as it grew.
Makes sense.
And he didn't see that as a problem at all. What mattered most to him was that people were searching for truth and understanding, regardless of how they got there.
That's pretty interesting, especially when you think about how many belief systems can be, like, really exclusive.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's say someone's totally new to Spiritism. What are some of the, like, core ideas they might come across in Kardec's book?
Well, Kardec really gets into the nature and origins of spirits. He says they're not, supernatural beings, but more like evolving entities. They existed before us, and they'll keep existing after our physical bodies are gone.
Oh, okay, I see.
He actually writes, the soul existed before the body, it will exist after the body. And this ties directly to the idea of reincarnation, which is like another central idea in Spiritism.
Reincarnation? Okay.
Yeah, he's suggesting that we're all essentially spirits on this like journey of progression. We experience multiple lives in different worlds to, learn and grow.
Okay, so it's not just, like, about chatting with ghosts, but understanding, like, the very essence of existence.
You got it. Like the nature of our souls and if there's life after we die here on Earth.
Wow, that's kind of a mind-blowing concept when you really think about it. But if these spirits are real, how do they, interact with us? Is that where mediums come in?
You're right on track. Kardec talks about mediums, people he thought had this special ability to act like a bridge between, the physical world and the spiritual one. They'd help with communication and offer insights from, like, the other side.
So it is possible to actually communicate with these spirits.
That's what Kardec believed.
Wow, that's both fascinating and a little, I have to admit, a little intimidating.
Kardec understood that. He emphasized how important discernment was, especially when it came to mediums and communicating with spirits.
Like being careful who you trust, right?
Yeah, exactly. He told people to approach those kinds of experiences with a healthy dose of skepticism, Think critically.
Makes sense.
He even warned against blindly trusting any one medium. It is better to believe too little than too much, he wrote.
It's good advice for almost anything, honestly. Like, don't just take anyone's word for it. Ask questions, do your own research, and then form opinion.
Absolutely. And thinking for yourself is super important, especially when we start looking at some of the pushback Spiritism got. Because, as you can imagine, not everyone was okay with these ideas back in the 19th century.
Right, I bet. Challenging the way people think is never easy.
Yeah. And there are some pretty big criticisms that Kardec had to deal with.
Okay, so like what? What were some of the biggest ones? And how did Kardec respond in his book, What is Spiritism?
Oh, there are quite a few. One of the most common accusations was charlatanism.
Charlatanism, okay.
Yeah, people claiming these mediums were, just frauds, using people's grief or curiosity to make money.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like any field, I guess.
Yeah.
There are always going to be people trying to take advantage.
Exactly.
Did Kardec address that at all?
He did. He acknowledged that, yeah, there were probably some shady characters within the movement, but he said that real Spiritism wasn't about, exploiting things. It was about seeking truth.
Okay.
He emphasized that being able to tell the difference between real mediums and fakes was
Right.
really crucial.
That's interesting. So how could someone tell the difference, like back then?
He really encouraged people to look for consistency in the messages they were getting,
Right. Yeah.
and also ethical behavior from these mediums and like a lack of showing off or trying to get rich off it.
Interesting.
He thought that genuine mediums were more like humble servants, just trying to help facilitate communication, not like showmen trying to get famous or rich.
So it's not just about like believing everything you hear. You have to be a little bit skeptical and use your judgment, but it also sounds like there's like a moral aspect to it.
Absolutely. Another criticism he tackled was this idea that Spiritism was like dangerous for your mental health.
Oh, okay.
Critics were saying that, messing around with the spirit world could make you unstable, maybe even like drive you crazy.
Yeah, I can see how people would think that. It does seem a little bit, I don't know, risky if you're not careful.
Right.
How did Kardec respond to that?
He countered that by emphasizing balance and reason. He said that Spiritism, when approached responsibly, wasn't about getting lost in the spirit world.
Okay, yeah.
It was more about gaining a broader understanding of life and death. He even compared it to, like, studying any complex subject.
Oh, interesting.
You have to be careful and use discernment to navigate, like, potentially difficult ideas.
So don't jump in the deep end without knowing how to swim, basically.
Exactly. And he also tackled the issue of contradictions within Spiritism. Some people pointed out inconsistencies in what spirits were saying or different interpretations of their doctrine.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's all about communicating with spirits, it seems fair to point out when those communications don't quite add up.
It does. But Kardec actually argued that those inconsistencies were like proof of Spiritism's dynamic nature.
Okay.
He reminded people that spirits, just like us, they have different levels of knowledge and understanding.
It's like that saying, if two people always agree, one of them isn't thinking.
Right. Kardec thought these differing viewpoints were actually like opportunities for further investigation and debate.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
He wanted spiritists to keep an open mind and be willing to, learn from each other.
Yeah.
But probably the biggest opposition Kardec had to deal with was from organized religion, especially the Catholic Church.
Oh, wow. I can imagine. It's pretty different from traditional religious views, right? Like challenging their ideas about the soul and the afterlife and all that.
Exactly. The church saw Spiritism as dangerous, like a heresy that could lead people away from what they saw as the true faith.
So how did Kardec deal with that? Did he, like, fight back?
That's the thing. He didn't. Instead of being defiant, he responded with, like, this call for understanding and tolerance.
Wow, that's surprising.
Right. He argued that having a diversity of religious beliefs was essential for us to progress as humans, and that Spiritism wasn't meant to contradict other religions. He thought it could actually make them richer and more meaningful. He even suggested that being exposed to different beliefs could help people understand and appreciate their own faith even more.
That's a pretty forward-thinking view, especially for back then.
It was, and it really showed Kardec's commitment to being open-minded and exploring ideas intellectually.
It sounds like he was walking a fine line there, though, trying to establish Spiritism
Yeah.
while also saying, like, hey, let's respect all these other beliefs, even the ones that might see us as a threat.
He was, and that's part of what makes his perspective so interesting. He didn't shy away from the controversy. He faced it head on, but he did it with reason and compassion and this genuine desire for, like, mutual understanding.
It takes courage to put your ideas out there knowing people might disagree, but to do that while also saying, hey, let's be respectful and keep an open mind, that's something else.
It really is. And honestly, in a world that feels increasingly divided, that approach feels, I don't know, incredibly relevant today.
It does. So we've talked about these specific criticisms, but how did Kardec see Spiritism fitting into the bigger picture? Did he think it could coexist with science, or were they always going to be separate things?
That's a really good question. It makes you wonder, like, if you were into Spiritism back then, would you feel like you had to choose between science and these, like, spiritual ideas?
Right.
Did Kardec talk about that at all?
He did, and it's actually pretty cool how forward-thinking he was about it. Kardec saw Spiritism as, like, a natural progression of how we understand things.
Okay.
He believed that as science learned more, our understanding of, the spiritual side of things would also grow.
So he thought they could, like, exist together, science and spirituality.
Yeah. He even said that they could work together. You
Yeah.
know, like help us see a bigger, more complete picture of the universe and where we fit into it all.
I like that.
He said, Spiritism and science are not opposed. They are two torches which, united, will shed a brighter light upon the mysteries of the universe. Wow, that's a really powerful way to put it, like two paths coming together to reveal some greater truth. Sounds like Kardec was all about being open-minded and, never stopping exploring, even if it meant questioning everything.
He really was. He believed that if we looked at Spiritism with that, like scientific curiosity, asking questions, looking for evidence, actually debating these things, we could learn some really deep truths about ourselves and the world around us.
It's definitely a message that still resonates. Even now, it seems like we're always looking for those quick, easy answers. But there's something to be said for just being curious, right?
Absolutely.
Being willing to learn and grow and maybe change our minds about things.
Exactly. And, while Spiritism might not be for everyone, those ideas at its core reason, compassion, searching for something more, those things still speak to people today, people who are looking for meaning and purpose beyond just the material world.
I think you're right. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Spiritism,
Yeah.
is there like one big thing you hope people listening will take away from it?
I think the most important thing to remember is that Kardec didn't present Spiritism as this like set in stone belief system. It was more like a framework, a way to understand things.
Yeah.
He wanted people to come to their own conclusions, not just blindly accept what he was saying.
He sounds like a true academic, encouraging debate and independent thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's why his work is still relevant. It pushes us to think critically, question what we believe and stay open to new ideas.
That's so important, especially now.
It is.
So much of the world feels so divided.
Right.
But having that, spirit of asking questions, being open-minded, feels more important than ever.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into Spiritism. Hopefully it's gotten everyone thinking and maybe even given you a new way to look at those big questions about life, death, and what might be out there beyond all that we know.